You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, I am answering a question from Heather from Florida, another person in my neck of the woods. So nice to have you listening, Heather. So thank you for emailing me. And her question is about how to handle big emotions in kids that cause big reactions and when it is aimed at siblings. So I'm going to read parts of her email, and I think so many of you will relate. I think this is one of the biggest struggles, is recognizing how to address an individual child's needs. So big, sensitive kid, right? Emotions are big, behaviors are big, and I have to be able to honor and respect and recognize that in that child. But then that child's behavior impacts the other siblings and how to mitigate and deal with that. So thank you, Heather, so much for writing in, and I'll share a little bit of her email with you all, and then I'll share some thoughts. So she says, I have 3 boys, 10, 8, and 5. I sometimes struggle to regulate and recognize my own emotions, so my kids and I are learning this together. Sound familiar? As a related aside, I'm a huge country music fan. I don't know how many of you all know that. If you've been with me for a while, I know I've mentioned it, but for those of you who might be new, welcome. And for full disclosure, I love country music. Just got back from 2 huge country music concerts last week, and it was like my happy place for 48 hours. So there's a song by Gabby Barrett, and she is known for writing songs that are very, very personal to her life and what's going on. And she writes songs about her husband and her kids. And so one of her most recent songs says, I'm paraphrasing now, but something along the lines of, the greatest thing I'll ever do is growing up raising you. And she's talking about how she's scared to death to be a mom, and she has these kids that, are looking to her for the answers and all the things that she's supposed to do right. And so the premise is, the greatest thing I'll ever do is growing up raising you. So I was thinking about that, Heather, when I read this, that you're learning this together with your kids. And isn't that a special thing to recognize that maybe we never learned this as kids for a variety of reasons? So now we're learning it together and we're helping our kids learn it. I think that's so special. So she says, I want to share a scenario with you and get your opinion on the best way to handle this type of behavior, because my oldest son has big emotions that are hard for him and me to handle at times. All right, so she shared a scenario. I'm going to summarize a little bit. But basically, the oldest forgot to do an assignment for school. And so there was a delay because he was trying to finish it in the morning before school. Also sound familiar, right? So because of the delay, they left the house late, and it was raining. And for those of you Floridians, not that most of you are natives, I realize there's only like 6 of us, but if you live in Florida, you know what our rain is like. So she bothered to say it was crazy rain, which I completely understand. And her oldest likes to be early for school and doesn't like being rushed. So as soon as they loaded up the car, he was upset, screaming as to why mom didn't tell him we were leaving late, et cetera, et cetera. So now all of a sudden, circumstances dictate that sensitive kid with big feelings is feeling overwhelmed, caught off guard, surprised, etc. Okay? So that now pushes us into child's going to react. So he is yelling, why didn't you tell me we were leaving late, etc. So Heather reflected his feelings. You're angry that you forgot to do your homework and had to finish it this morning. Very helpful. Let's talk about our reflecting feelings pillar right there for a second. He is feeling a big emotion, and Heather, you validated that. Really, really helpful, very on target. And you even returned responsibility. You're angry you forgot to do your homework and had to finish it this morning. It's very clear that that was a choice that he made, and now that is contributing to the circumstance. And then also, you're anxious about being late for school. Also important because he is now concerned that we left late, I might not be to school on time. Okay, so his emotions get high really quickly, take a long time to get back down. This is going to be especially hard when you're trapped in the car. Yes. Okay. So then this is where it kind of takes the turn. So now he turns towards his brothers and starts saying mean things to them. So he's saying to his younger brothers, you can't even talk. Nobody can even understand you. You can't even do division. So this is now his big feelings coming out in aggression toward his siblings. All right. So Heather says, these attacks are usually unprovoked. His brothers are minding their own business. I cannot let him attack his brothers and put them down, but I've never figured out how to handle it. And then says, I've talked with him at calm moments about how we don't talk to people like that. We don't call names or put down other people. But in times of high emotion, he continues to do this. So then the final question is, I always emphasize with him, but how can... empathize, I'm sure is what you meant. So once again, I always empathize with him, but how can I help him be in his feelings without attacking anyone else? All right, Heather, thank you so much for the email. And this is such a consistent issue across the board for almost anybody with multiple children. So I really appreciate your vulnerability and reaching out with this scenario so that we can unpack it together. That'll be really helpful for everybody. The path to calm, confident, and in control parenting starts now. All right, so let's talk about what's going on because the why matters. You're going to hear me say that ad nauseum, and you're going to understand the value of starting to filter everything through the lens of why. Because if we focus on what is said or what is done or the emotions or the behavior, we miss the opportunity to really deeply understand what is driving what's going on inside the child. So the why is always important. And in this case, it's powerlessness. So let's make sense of that. He felt powerless that he had to hurry up and try to finish his homework. He felt powerless that you left late. He felt powerless over how big his feelings got. He felt powerless over fear of not making it to school on time. Probably had been feeling powerless about fear of getting in trouble for not doing his homework. You know, what if I don't finish it? What if I get a bad grade? Whatever. So there's all of these what ifs running through his brain. And all of these scenarios make him feel that he has no control over anything that's going on. So when you have a child that feels that they are in a state of powerlessness, they will try to grasp at any measure of power and control that they can get. Which is why he starts yelling, which is why he starts attacking, which is why he gets verbally aggressive. Because what is happening inside is I feel like I have no control. So the only thing I know to do is to try to take control over something or someone. And there's a hierarchy. This is kind of a related aside. There's a hierarchy in a family of the power flow. So if you think about it, it's almost always oldest to youngest, and or it's biggest to smallest, and or it's strongest to weakest. So let's think through this. In a standard tier, it's going to be dad, mom, oldest, middle, youngest, pet. So when we think in terms of a child is going to only have power and control capacity over younger siblings or weaker siblings or smaller siblings, it makes sense that your oldest is going to take advantage of having two younger brothers over which he can exert his power and control. And it's feigned power and control because, quite honestly, saying you can't even do division, it doesn't really put him in any position of power and control, but it makes him feel powerful. So if we understand the why, that helps, because that helps us address it, that helps us talk about it, that helps us figure out antidotes for it, et cetera, et cetera. So Heather reflecting his feeling is one of the most helpful things that you can do. So continue to do that, but filter it through the lens of he feels that he has no control over the situation, so he's trying to take control now. That would be something that you could also acknowledge. It makes you feel like you don't have a say in any of this, so you're trying to do and say things that make you feel like you have more control. You can say something like that to a child because it's reflective of what's going on. It's likely that he will probably argue with you and say that he's not doing it, but it is still helpful for a child to hear the enlargement of what's happening. Okay, so that is a really helpful piece of this to start. The second piece is when we go to school for therapy, we often hear about the anger iceberg. And what the illustration of that is when we're learning about therapy and what we need to unpack with people. And obviously this is for adults, not kids, but I'm just giving you a visual to kind of keep in mind about this. So the anger iceberg is, you'll see this tiny little iceberg sticking up out of the water, and the water line is, shortly underneath where the tip of the iceberg is. And anger is at the top. So above the water, the tip has anger. But if you look down further on the paper under the water, there's all of these other emotions underneath. And anger is just the tip, and it's masking everything that you can't see. So that's like the adult version of what we learn in therapy. Here's what it is for kids. Every negative emotion. So for a second, discard all positive emotions. Every negative emotion requires vulnerability, with the exception of anger. Because anger makes you feel powerful. So when you are ashamed, you can mask it with anger because shame requires vulnerability. When you're disappointed, you can mask it with anger because disappointment requires vulnerability. When you feel guilty, when you feel embarrassed, when you feel let down, when you feel defeated, when you feel inadequate, I can go on and on and on. When you feel anything negative, it forces you to be vulnerable if you're going to actually express that feeling, unless you just default to anger, which makes you feel powerful. So when he's yelling and when he's being verbally aggressive and when he's saying hurtful, mean things that are spiteful to his brothers, it's putting him in a feeling of control and power because the anger is masking what's actually going on. So that is also very important to help see through an appropriate lens. So as he's doing this to his brothers, as he's yelling at you, it is an attempt to hide what he's actually feeling, which is why reflecting feelings is so important. Because the more we reflect a child's feelings, the better their emotional vocabulary becomes, and therefore he will allow himself to express those feelings because he better understands them. He will allow himself to communicate those feelings because he better understands them. So the more you can reflect feelings, the better it will get. But he is masking his vulnerability with anger. And then as far as how to handle it, what to do about it, helpful rule of thumb from the Child-Parent Relationship Training Program, which is a 10-week coaching program. When a child is drowning, it's not the time to teach them to swim. So Heather, I noticed that you said, I've talked to him later at calm moments. Okay, that is hugely important. When a child is drowning, it's not the time to teach them to swim. When they're upheaved, when they're overwhelmed, when there's all of the emotions swirling around, they can't hear a word you say anyway. So that's not the time to have a conversation. You might have to set a limit in that moment, but that's not a moment where you want to actually help a child learn what they should be doing instead. That comes in those calm moments. Okay, so in the moment, you might have to set a limit. And if the child is unable to comply with the limit, then you might need to move to an ultimate choice. So you would acknowledge the child's feeling, which you did, Heather. You're angry that you forgot to do your homework. Then you set the neutral limit. But your brothers are not for speaking to that way. And when we get to limit setting, I will unpack for you all of these components and how we phrase it and why and all of that. But I can't dive into that today. So please be patient when I get to the limit setting episode in the curriculum. You'll learn a lot more about this. And if you've been with me for a while, you're probably more familiar with limit setting anyway. So I'm just walking you through what it sounds like, and then I'll dive into it in a later episode. But you're really angry, you forgot to do your homework, but your brothers are not for speaking to you that way. You can choose to sit and not say anything until you're able to be nice, or you can write down all the things that you're thinking so that you don't say them out loud. Okay. And I just threw that out. There are lots of other alternatives that could be offered in that scenario. And I'll help you figure out how to give those alternatives when we get to limit setting. But if he is unable or unwilling to comply once you've set that 3 times, so you say it, he still says something mean to one of his brothers. You say it again, he says something else mean. By the 3rd time, you move to ultimate choice giving. So then at that point, it's an if you choose, then you choose. So if you choose to speak like that to your brothers when you're angry, you choose not to have TV tonight. If you choose to speak kindly to your brothers, even when you're frustrated, you choose to have TV tonight. Which do you choose? So notice that it's an if-then choice, but it's an if-then for a positive and a negative. We're really good about giving the negative and forgetting to say the positive. So what typically happens is, if you choose to speak unkindly to your brothers when you're mad, you choose not to have TV tonight. And we just stop there. Well, that's not really a choice. So we always offer absolute on purpose. We always offer the positive and the negative choice. And notice that I used the word choose 5 times. If you choose, number 1, to speak unkindly to your brothers when you're mad, you choose to not to have TV tonight. If you choose to speak kindly even when you're frustrated, that's the 3rd one. You choose to have TV tonight. There's 4. Which do you choose? Number 5. It makes it very clear that the child has responsibility and ownership over the outcome. It makes it very clear the child has a choice. It makes it very clear the child has power. So let's circle back to what I mentioned earlier. When a child feels powerless and they're grasping at any measure of power and control they can get, and we give them a choice, all of a sudden we've returned power to them and they don't have to fight for it anymore. Notice how it all comes together with a little bow. So when we give an ultimate choice, now all of a sudden he has power in the situation again. So then your only job is to enforce the choice that he made. And I happen to use TV. Let me quickly clarify. I will get to choice giving as a pillar as well, so I promise I'll give you more details when we get there. But you want the consequence to be something that matters to the child. If he doesn't care 2 hoots about TV, that is not an appropriate consequence that he gets to have or not have based on the choice that he makes. TV would have to be a pretty important currency, is the word we use. So if TV matters to him, that would make sense there. If friends matter to him, then we would use that. If dessert after dinner matters to him, whatever is a currency, that is what is used in an ultimate choice. So if you choose to say mean things to your brothers when you're mad, you choose not to have whatever. If you choose to speak kindly to your brothers, even though you're frustrated, you choose to have positive outcome. Which do you choose? But it has to be something that's motivating for the child so that it actually warrants consideration of what he chooses. And the outcome matters, right? Because all your job is to enforce the choice that was made. So when he chooses to be kind for the rest of the car ride, as he's getting out of the car, Heather, you say, I see you chose to have TV tonight because you chose to be kind to your brothers. They need to be told that you acknowledge out loud the choice that was made. We're really good about acknowledging when they make the negative choice. Okay, I see you've chosen not to have TV tonight. First of all, that's not neutral. That's not calm. It's not indifferent. Choice giving works when we have no skin in the game. All we do is enforce the choice that the child made. So we just calmly say, I see you chose whatever it was, positive or negative, doesn't affect us. We would always choose for our kids to have the best things. So if they choose not to, that's their choice. So we don't have to say it with disdain or frustration or disappointment or anything. We just say it factually and neutrally for positive or negative outcomes. So I see you chose to speak kindly to your brother, so you chose to have TV tonight. Have a good day. Love you. And then he gets out of the car. When you give limits and ultimate choices, a child very quickly learns, I have power over this. I get a say in the outcome. And when I choose the negative, I really don't like that. So I'm going to choose the positive. And that is where self-control comes in. That is where self-regulation comes in. And that is the power of limit setting and choice giving. So Heather, thank you so much for your question. I hope that was helpful to you. I hope that was helpful to everyone, because inevitably we are faced with scenarios where it doesn't seem like anything we do matters. It doesn't seem like anything we do affects the situation. So I think it's helpful to unpack a scenario like that. So thanks again, Heather. I appreciate it. If you would like me to answer your question, I would love to. Please email me at brenna@thekidcounselor.com. You can also call and leave a message on a recording for me. 813-812-5525. And then I'll be able to listen to your question that way as well, if you'd rather do that instead of email. Again, if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, playtherapyparenting.com. I would love to have you on there, and then I can stay in touch with you. I'm really grateful for each and every one of you. I appreciate you taking me with you on your car rides and your bike rides and all the different places that you go. So I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.